Hello everyone, welcome back. Today I thought of just taking a look at a video that was in my feed. So yeah, it had a title that was interesting. The smartest man in the world is being interviewed on different subject matters. Some of them are of interest to me, so I wanted to hear what he has to say, right? So let's take a listen together and see, and I'll interrupt, or I'll put my 2 cents in for those who care. And that's about it. Here we go.
Mm-hmm. If we're talking about a theory of everything, the first question we have to establish, does God exist?
Yes.
Simple as that.
Well, it's the identity has the reality has an identity. Okay? The identity is that as which something exists. Okay? Matter of fact, when you say the word reality, you're naming an identity. You're identifying something.
I'm smiling because your answer on this is so beautiful. It just reminds me of Moses at the burning bush. And Moses at the burning bush says, "Who shall I tell the people that you are?" Talking to God. And God says, "Tell them I am that I am."
That's right.
I am identity itself. I'm being himself.
That's exactly right. And that's what the CTMU says. It just comes up with the mathematical structure that you need to build a reality out of that. You see?
Okay. Now, in the first part, because I did watch some of the first part, and the first part of this interview, he's talking about the CTMU or something, which is his theory of everything. A lot of it I found vague, so I wasn't really that interested in that. Plus, I'll leave that to theoretical physicists to check out. But this is a somewhat more interesting topic. So I did see that he had said that when asked if God exists, he gave the affirmation that yes, like definite. And yeah, and so now they're going into the explanation. And he said something which the interviewer seemed to agree with. And to me, what they were talking about, it just seems somewhat of a tautology, like something like I'll be there when I get there, that type of thing. It's not really an explanation for his specific affirmation of that God exists, So that hopefully that's what we'll get into here. Okay, let's continue.
So you come up with that identity, and then you search it for its properties. You see, once you've built the preliminary framework, then you start deducing the properties of this identity, and you find out that those properties match those of God as described in most of the world's major religions. Right?
Just the theistic religions? So I'm thinking Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, or are you talking also of, say,
Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, Vedism? Of course, Hinduism and Vedism, they have a God. Taoism, their central principle is the way, or the Tao,
yep.
Okay? And they don't see Tao as God.
Yep.
And then in Buddhism, of course, you've got, they are trying basically to achieve sunyata, or emptiness, right? Which is, a lot of Buddhists don't even understand what that's supposed to mean. But once again, there's no God there. You can kind of read God implicitly. Some Buddhists, I've talked to Buddhists who actually think that there is a God in Buddhism of a sort. But it's, that concept of pure consciousness is what it is, okay? And if you ask them, well, whose consciousness are you talking about? They will point at themselves and say, my consciousness. In a way, they kind of attribute the existence of everything to themselves. Okay?
I know I've known a lot of people in Hollywood and Washington, D.C. who do the same thing, actually.
Well, that's right. That's why Buddhism is very fashionable among some of those people.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
So you come down to the same thing, all right? Everybody has the Tao, or the way, that's the way reality works, right? And everybody, has sunyata, which is pure syntax, right? Pure cognition with no instantiation, no content, right? And then you've got what the Abrahamic religions call God. It's all the same thing, okay? But what are its properties?
Yeah.
Okay, are its properties such that you can deny the existence of God, or are its properties such that God definitely has to exist? And the answer is, God exists.
God definitely has
properties of the central substance and central principle of reality, those properties are attributed to God. including, of course, things like you have the three O's: omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence, but then you've also got consciousness. God has to be sentient.
So we're not just defining God out of existence. Sometimes you'll hear people say God exists, but they'll give God such a weak and shallow definition that the God that they're describing has no relation to the God that we conceive of. You're saying, no, this God is God himself is conscious and therefore personal?
Yes. You can establish a personal relationship with God. We're images of God. You know what an image is? It's basically the product of a mapping. God maps himself into each human being, right? That's a very personal thing that God is doing for us, right? And I don't understand how anybody can say that it's any different. We reflect the structure of the universe, each one of us. Well,
I'll try that. That God is reflected upon. I mean, a lot of these things are pure speculation. What he's talking about the basis of a lot of religions, which is basically, let's say, in that sense, speculative or discovering that maybe there is something beyond the limits of our consciousness, things of that nature that seem to be common because we all want to know what happens, after we die, that type of thing, right?
Carried by it. Everything we do, we exist in a medium. What is that medium? Right? Where did it come from?
Yeah.
What holds it together? What is the unifying coherence, the source of coherence of that medium?
Now, is your claim a pantheistic claim that God is the universe or the universe is God and that's that? Or no? Or is God outside of the universe and created?
God is greater than, well, what is the universe?
Damned if I know.
You ever hear of the simulation hypothesis?
Yes.
Okay, well, the simulation hypothesis is basically the idea that the reality we see around us, physical reality, is simulated on some sort of an automaton or a computer.
Yeah, some aliens somewhere have just, they've fooled us.
Right, exactly. Eat a piece of licorice.
Before one launches into the simulation, one needs a little sustenance,
I've never actually seen anyone that's trying to explain something that should be relatively profound be distracted by licorice before. But it's the first, for everything. But again, he's the smartest man in the world, so maybe he needs that sugar intake as he goes along to explain things, which I'm still waiting for an explanation. He's just saying statements that have no real proof behind them in any which way that I can understand,
Okay, so anyway, the idea is that you've got some kind of an automaton running. You've got a simulation running on it. And God, it's more panentheistic. Do you know what panentheism is?
I do. I think I do. But that means that we are in God. Let me know how I've gone wrong. We are in God, and God is in us. And it is not merely that God and the creation are one and the same, but they are quite related. So that's something approaching panentheism?
A little bit, yes.
Okay.
There's the idea is that you've got the physical universe that you see around you, but God is not confined to the physical universe.
Okay.
See, there's an ordinary pantheist assumes that God is somehow confined to the universe, that there is just what we see around us and God is in every piece of it. God is distributed over it.
Yeah.
Right? But it's a little bit more complex than that, because this part of the universe that we see around us cannot exist just by itself.
Yeah.
Okay? There are certain things that it entails. And when you go into those entailments, that's how you get to God. That's how you get to the identity of reality. Okay? And now to get back to the reality of self-simulation, or at least that's what I call it, self-simulation. But to get back to the simulation hypothesis, that we're living in the display of that simulation. In addition to the display, there is also a processing aspect. Okay? And God captures both of those things. He captures both the display and the processor.
What do you mean? I hate to put it in.
Well, I mean, okay, here's the display. You realize the display contains states.
Yep.
Okay, you see things, the objects contain states. States are static.
Yep.
That's why they're called states.
Yeah.
Okay, static. How do they change? Well, they have to be processed. Something has to
Okay.
process.
Yeah.
And in the calculus, for example, those are tiny little infinitesimal intervals, okay? But they are not actually contained in the states themselves. They have a neighborhood, a little tangent space or what have you, where you can sort of draw little vectors that suggest that some kind of processing is going on. But the idea of being a state and being a process, those are two different things in the ordinary way of looking at it, okay? It turns out that you can't properly describe reality and causation at all unless you put those things together somehow. And that's what it takes God to do. Okay? God provides the processing functionality for your state. You have an internal state, an external state. You're a material human being. Right? Like, to explain how that is changing through time, and maintaining its coherence through time, even as it changes, that's what you need God for.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that entirely. And so I might not be sophisticated enough to parse all of the quibbles that there might be, but broadly speaking, as a Christian, so much of what you're saying resonates as obviously true for me. The idea that, well, I'm a member of the body of Christ. The idea that God creates the world in this great act of love, this great act of charity.
Self-love.
Well,
self-love. Don't forget, you're an image of God.
Right.
So in loving Himself, God loves you.
And
you're supposed to love God back.
Right. And this ties into something like the Trinity, right? The idea that God is three persons in one divine unity. So all of this is making a lot of sense to me. So.
Okay, I'm going to stop it here for a second. It's not making a lot of sense to me. It's making a lot of sense in the point of view of a person that obviously is. He says that he's a Christian, so he's a believer. So that's why they connect, I think, the two of them, and they intersect well, because they're both talking, I think, they're both talking about beliefs, okay, which seem to support one another. But again, a belief is not a factual statement or something that one can say for sure, this is what it is, and then not be able to explain it in full, or at least in a way that that anybody can understand, at least the general concept of it. So up to now, I hear a lot of vague things and things that match what I would consider a belief, as opposed to a factual concept. Anyway, moving on.
Now, how do I make sense of consciousness?
Well, ordinarily, you know what quantum mechanics, you know what quantization is?
I know the word.
Yeah. Well, you decide what the ultimate irreducible objects are. Those are the quanta in terms of which you reason. It turns out that in order to quantize that theory that I was talking about, that theory of identity, where you've got the display and you've got the processor, and it's handling both. It turns out that in order to handle both of those things, you need a certain kind of quantum. That quantum is called an identity operator. God is the identity. So obviously these little quanta, they have to be, they're doing things, they're processing, so we can call them operators, right? They are identity operators. Okay, the identity operator has, basically it takes input from the outside world, recognizes it or accepts it using syntax, processes it, and then returns it to the world as external state. Okay, so things come in, then they're processed, right? There's throughput, which is, you could call that the subjective or internal state of the identity operator, and then it's returned to the external universe.
But are you attributing now?
So what I'm saying is that's consciousness. And I'm saying that consciousness exists in every part of the universe because those are the quanta.
That's what I'm asking. Are you telling me that this table is conscious?
In that sense, yes. Generically conscious. But it's relying on our consciousness to do it. There's levels of quanta, okay? These are tertiary quanta. They're all put together using physical localistic forces, right? But those are underdeterminative. They don't fully determine what happens. Why? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, for example, it tells you that, the quantum rules, they're probabilistic.
Right.
They don't actually determine events, okay? So what determines events? We do. We don't know how we do it, but we do it. When everybody's will is put together, we're all creating the best possible universe we can for ourselves. And God is what harmonizes all of our different perspectives and makes things happen for all of us at the same time. And if we were doing things correctly, this would be the best of all possible worlds. Sadly, however, we oftentimes make mistakes. And that's what we have to get out of doing, but we can't get out of doing it until we understand what reality is, what we are, and what the relationship between those two things is.
Now, you've mentioned two things that raise a new question for me, which is you mentioned this idea of simulation, just the simulation or self-simulation, and you've mentioned us doing things. So then it would seem to me we have to tackle the question, do we really do much of anything at all, in the sense, do we have free will?
Yes, we do. Okay.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I always thought we did.
Well, yes, we have to have free will. I was discussing with you earlier the idea of a fixed array.
Okay, I'm going to stop here because this is getting tedious for me. These statements that he's saying, and he's backing them up with these speculative terms and so on. The only way that makes sense to me is since I'm a speculative fiction writer, what he seems to be defining as a god is more something like that I would project as a speculative fiction story, which would be, let's say, for example, take a humanoid. Let's say humans survive themselves and we exist for another 10,000 years or so on, you know. At that point, our technology would be so advanced, you would think, because it's growing exponentially, that a human being would be able to manufacture, to create a game-like scenario where he or she could construct a game. He would be the programmer, or she would be the programmer of that game, and structure the game, and we are in that simulation, in that game, so-called simulation, you know, and we are the programs in that game. Now that to me makes a lot more sense than what he's talking about, a personal God and so on, because at that point it does make sense, you know, it does define more what I think the smartest man in the world is talking about, which is a god, which in that point, let's say this programmer would be perceived as a god from the point of view of the programs in the simulation. That would be us, and because that being exists inside the game. We are a reflection of that being, and outside of the game as well, because he's also the programmer. But that doesn't mean he's God or he exists beyond time and space, you know, at least from the point of view of eternity, you know. So that to me makes sense, fitting into what this person is trying to describe. And that's possible. I don't have a problem with that. It's a speculative possibility, and actually I find that's more probable than the type of ideologies that we form, where there's a personal God who is basically, as he described, creates us in his image because of self-love. You know, the term is contrary to any type of understanding, fundamental understanding, or profound understanding of what God could be. You know, the idea that God has a self and that he projects himself in a simulation or in a world that we exist, or in a universe, and we're part of that universe, a very tiny part of the universe, and we're a reflection of him, and he's a reflection of us, and basically he does it out of love or self-love. He created us and he wants love back. I mean, that is very much putting characteristics to God that are very similar to us. So in this particular case, and the cases of the type of ideologies that form religions that believe in a personal God, it's more a projection of ourselves that we're doing. So basically, we we create a God in our own image and then reverse the whole thing around and actually end up worshiping the thing that we created. It's similar to artificial intelligence. We have created artificial intelligence, and at some point, from my understanding, it'll surpass our intelligence by far, and maybe at one point we will consider it God, you know. So we created it, and so on. So it's an interesting way of looking at this for me anyway. That it explains, I think, what he's trying to describe here in The Smartest Man in the World, supposedly, you know. As for the concept of God, whether God exists or not, it doesn't really matter if somebody tells somebody else, yes, God exists, because ultimately it's for each and every person to find out through their own inner search if there is something beyond the self. That's about it. I'm going to finish it here. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye.